I'm 39, and I've been married to my husband, Jake, who is 42 for over 15 years. By all appearances, our marriage has been solid. No explosive fights, no lingering resentments, just a steady, loving partnership. But like many couples, we faced a deeply personal challenge a few years back: infertility. That chapter of our lives was devastating. I'd never really opened up about it to anyone, but the heartache we felt was real. Every failed treatment, every hopeful test result followed by crushing disappointment, it all took a toll. We hoped adoption would be a path to parenthood, but the bureaucracy in our region made it seem almost impossible. Pair that with our full time work schedules, and we felt we simply couldn't be the parents a child would need. So, painful as it was, we reluctantly shelved that dream. Around that same time, a different idea began to form. Since having children of our own seemed unlikely, for now anyway, we wondered if helping out within our family might be the next best thing. Jake's younger sister, Karen, had been through a difficult split with her ex, Frank. While Frank was largely absent, barely partaking in child support and coping with his own struggles, including alcoholism, Karen was shouldering the weight as a single mother. She held down two jobs, yet struggled to keep all the plates spinning. Karen had three bright kids flourishing despite the hardships: Lily, 23, who excelled in school and earned a scholarship at university; Max, 20, finishing high school; and Lucas, 17, still navigating his way through his teen years. Watching them do their best despite everything, Jake and I felt compelled to help. We had some savings put aside, and to us, they were family. This was what family meant. We offered to pay their tuition. It felt like a meaningful, lasting way to support them. First, everything felt hopeful. Karen's gratitude was heartfelt. She thanked us repeatedly, and her kids were polite and respectful. Lily, the oldest, was thriving. She graduated college, secured a good job, and would often send us messages of sincere thanks, even though she might have found a way on her own. But to us, that didn't matter. We were glad we could offer a lift when she needed it. Meanwhile, Max and Lucas were doing well in high school, seemingly poised to follow in Lily's footsteps. Then the trouble began. Right as Max graduated high school, we, like parents normally would, asked, "What are your plans for college?" But instead of saying thank you or sharing his goals, Max dropped a bombshell. "I don't want to go to college. Just give me the money instead." The words hit Jake and me like a punch in the gut. We blinked at him, bewildered. It wasn't petty cash we were talking about. It was serious tuition money. Jake managed to ask, "What do you need the money for then?" And with a shrug, Max said he wanted to start a business online. Just a vague something online, no proposal, no outline, nothing remotely concrete, just, "I'll figure it out." It felt like he believed we'd hand over thousands of dollars just because he asked, but that's not how we operate. Jake listened and tried to dig deeper. "Okay, so what kind of business? What's your idea?" Max had no plan. He gave no details. He had no contingency plan, no mentors lined up. He just shrugged again and said, "Something online. I'll manage." The audacity stung. We didn't respond then. We told him we'd need time to talk it over. He shrugged once more, muttered, "Cool," and walked away. But a few weeks later, Max started texting Jake nonstop. "Did you decide yet? Are you going to give me that money?" As if we owed it to him. Back then, I told Jake we shouldn't fund anything that didn't have a plan or path. So we had a sit-down conversation and decided we couldn't give him the money next month or ever unless he had something detailed and real. We had to teach him responsibility, not enable entitlement. When we communicated this to Max, he erupted. But it wasn't a meltdown directed at us. Instead, he turned to Karen and our mother-in-law, Linda, crying victim. "They promised me this. They're going back on their word." Suddenly, the entire family was involved. Karen, who had been so appreciative, now took her son's side. Linda started calling Jake, questioning why we were being heartless. In social gatherings, Max would make snide remarks in my direction. "We're not proud of this," but he was clearly embarrassed and resentful, and he let everyone know it. He labeled us ungrateful. He shamed me by insinuating we had been stingy. What's worse, he spread rumors that we had made a big, extravagant financial promise and then backed out at the last minute. I felt blindsided and hurt. We had never given a single tuition check without confirming the kids' placement, course load, or acceptance. We agreed to help, but with the understanding that they too were invested. Max's behavior felt manipulative. It wasn't just immature, it was disrespectful. Worse, he was using Karen and Linda to guilt trip us. By the time the accusation hit the dinner table at a rainy November family gathering, Max staring right at me as he quietly told me how cold I was, it became humiliating. I froze, I felt exposed, and that was it. The moment I decided Max needed to learn a lesson he'd never forget. I said nothing then at the table, but inside I was fuming. That night, in the car on the way home, I told Jake I was done just letting it slide. I needed to do something, not to be vindictive, but to protect our marriage, our boundaries, and our integrity. We'd been so supportive of this family, but we couldn't stand by as someone slandered us without cause, nor accepted non-existent promises. I made a decision. Max needed consequences. So I devised a plan that wouldn't just shut down his entitlement, it would also teach him humility and respect. And I'm proud to say, it worked. Karen began insisting we should be more supportive of Max's aspirations, arguing that every young man needs someone to believe in him. At the same time, Linda, Jake's mother, chimed in with her own accusations, saying we had gone back on our promise to support the children's education. But Jake wasn't having any of it. He shut that down with a calm but firm tone that made it clear where we stood. He reiterated that we had no issue paying for Max's college tuition if he chose to attend. That was the agreement, but handing over thousands of dollars for some vague, undefined business idea, that wasn't support. That was throwing good money after bad. Despite Karen's emotional appeals and Linda's guilt tripping, we stood our ground. No amount of pressure could justify funding a business that didn't even exist beyond a vague concept of something online. After several tense conversations, things finally died down, or so we thought. Karen made some offhand comment about possibly selling old family heirlooms to raise the money for Max's venture. It sounded like a terrible idea, but we stayed out of it. It was her choice, her risk. Unsurprisingly, Max's grand business idea fizzled into nothing. There was never any real plan, no concrete steps, no attempt to even learn about entrepreneurship. It all fell apart without any effort to salvage it. Jake and I weren't shocked in the least. But just when we thought the drama had peaked, Max came crawling back. As if nothing had happened, he approached us with a new proposition. He wanted to go to college after all. He said he was ready and asked if we would still honor our original offer. Against our better judgment, and probably because we were holding on to the hope that he'd turn things around, we agreed. We paid for his tuition as promised, but the second chance we gave him didn't bring the gratitude we expected. In fact, something shifted again. Max went from distant to downright cold. At family events, he'd barely acknowledge us. His once polite demeanor gave way to indifference. No thank yous, no eye contact, just silence or curt replies whenever we tried to engage. That was when it hit me. Maybe we'd made a mistake. Maybe trying to help Karen and her kids wasn't the noble act we thought it was. The sense of warmth we'd once felt had evaporated, replaced by awkwardness and tension. What began as an attempt to uplift our family had morphed into a situation where we were being taken for granted. Still, we tried to be civil. We kept up appearances, biting our tongues through awkward dinners and uncomfortable conversations. Then one day, Karen invited us to a dinner she was hosting for Lucas's 17th birthday. Jake, ever the optimist, thought it was a good chance to mend fences. I had my doubts, but I agreed. Family was family after all. I had this uneasy feeling before we even got to her house, a kind of intuition that something wasn't quite right. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. When we arrived, everything seemed fine on the surface. The house smelled of home-cooked food, decorations were up, and all the familiar faces were there. Karen, her kids, and of course, Linda. We sat down for dinner, and I tried to focus on the occasion. It was Lucas's birthday, and I didn't want to let old tensions overshadow that. But the unease didn't go away. Max barely acknowledged our presence. No greetings, no eye contact, just silence. He answered questions with one-word replies and looked past us like we were invisible. It hurt, but I tried to let it go. Then, right in the middle of the meal, it happened. Lucas looked up from his plate, stared directly at me, and said, "How did Jake even find someone like you attractive? You're so old and ugly." Time stopped. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't move. My fork hovered in midair, my breath caught in my throat. I sat, frozen, staring at him, trying to understand if I'd really heard what I thought I had. My face flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. This was his birthday dinner? And this was how he chose to speak to me? Jake, usually the calm and measured one, exploded. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His voice boomed as he demanded, "What the hell did you just say?" The entire table went silent. Even the clinking of utensils stopped. But what happened next was worse than the insult itself. Karen, Max, and Linda all burst out laughing, like Lucas had just made a clever joke instead of delivering a cruel personal attack. They didn't just dismiss it, they found it amusing. I sat there, mortified, while they chuckled as if my humiliation was entertainment. Jake turned to Lucas, his voice stern, and said, "You apologize right now." But Lucas didn't flinch. He just smirked and said, "What? It was just a joke." It was my breaking point. My face burned, not just from shame, but from fury. A joke? No, that wasn't a joke. That was calculated, and everyone at the table knew it. I turned to Karen, desperate for some sign that she'd rein her son in, but she just shrugged and said, "Oh, come on, it's his birthday. Don't ruin it over something so small. He's just a kid." A kid, 17 years old, is not a toddler. He's nearly an adult and fully capable of understanding the impact of his words. Brushing off what he said as harmless banter was infuriating. It wasn't something small. It was demeaning, disrespectful, and intentionally cruel. Jake was fuming. I was crushed. And yet, all around us were family members laughing or minimizing the situation as though I was the one overreacting. At that moment, I realized just how deep the entitlement ran in that family and how little respect they had for the people who'd been supporting them all along. I sat there, stunned, disbelief pulsing through me. Jake, on the other hand, was boiling with rage. He looked directly at Lucas, his voice low and sharp. "You apologize right now or we're leaving." But Lucas just leaned back, still wearing that smug grin like this whole thing had gone exactly the way he wanted. Karen? She didn't even flinch. She just sat there sipping her drink like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. It was as though humiliating me at her dinner table wasn't even worth a raised eyebrow. And then came Linda, chiming in with her usual pearls of tone-deaf wisdom. Well, people are allowed to have opinions. As if a teenage boy calling me ugly was some sort of thoughtful critique I needed to accept with grace. That was the final straw for Jake. He stood, reached for my hand, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "We're leaving. This conversation isn't going anywhere until someone owns up and apologizes to her." His tone left no room for argument, but the moment I stood, Linda grabbed my arm and tried to tug me back into my chair. Her grip was tight for someone her age. "Come on," she said in that faux gentle voice of hers. "It's his birthday. Don't make this into a big deal. He didn't mean anything by it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw clenched as I yanked my arm free. He's not a child, I snapped. And even if he were, it's your job, to teach him manners. As I looked around the table, I saw Max and Lucas sitting together, both grinning like they'd just won a game. It was crystal clear now. This was orchestrated. They'd wanted to provoke a reaction, and they were enjoying every second of it. My eyes locked with theirs, and I told them plainly, "This isn't funny. You're both cruel, and one day you're going to regret treating people this way." Before anyone could respond, I turned on my heel and walked out the front door. Jake followed me closely, his hand on my back, guiding me out of the toxic mess. We didn't say a word as we got into the car. The silence was heavy, not from lack of things to say, but from the sheer emotional exhaustion. I was shaking, not from what Lucas had said, but from the utter disbelief that no one else thought it was a big deal. Not one person at that table had stood up for me, except Jake. To them, I was the one making a scene. I was the one who needed to toughen up or let it go. When we got home, we didn't even speak. We didn't have to. Jake was just as disgusted as I was. Um, we went to our separate corners of the house to cool off. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to wrap my head around how we got here, how all the support, money, and care we had poured into this family had resulted in such blatant disrespect. But the story didn't end there. Exactly 1 week later, there was a knock at the door. Jake opened it, and there they were, Karen and Linda, standing on our porch with forced smiles and sheepish expressions. I wasn't surprised. I already knew they weren't there for the right reasons. They hadn't come to make things right. They were there because they needed something. I overheard their voices before I even made it down the hallway. They were already inside, standing in the living room, locked in a tense conversation with Jake. Karen's voice had that pleading tone she used when she wanted something, while Linda stood beside her, trying to present herself as the voice of reason, the peacekeeper. But I knew better. I walked right past them, said nothing, and went straight to the bedroom. I wanted no part of their performance. Of course, Karen couldn't let it go. A minute later, there was a knock on the bedroom door. "Can we talk?" she asked, and without waiting for permission, she opened the door and stepped in, with Linda on her heels. "We just wanted to apologize," Karen began. "We talked to Lucas. He feels really bad about what happened." I stared at her, not saying a word. It felt like I was watching a scene from a poorly acted drama. They were going through the motions, trying to sound remorseful, but it all felt hollow, so I cut straight to the point. "If Lucas is so sorry," I said flatly, "then where is he?" Karen blinked. For a second, she looked like she'd been slapped. She stammered for a moment and then said, "He's too embarrassed to come. He didn't think you'd want to see him." "Right," I replied, "because facing the person you insulted is harder than pretending nothing happened." The room went quiet. Linda offered a weak smile, but I wasn't interested. I could see right through them. They weren't here for closure or reconciliation. They were here because they wanted a favor. Sure enough, a few minutes later, after some more half-hearted apologies, Karen finally got to the point. "Lucas is finishing high school soon," she said slowly, "and he wants to go to college. We were hoping maybe you could help out with his tuition like you did with Lily." I couldn't even hide my expression. I just stared at them, amazed they could stand there and make such a request after everything that had happened. No accountability, no sincerity, just straight to asking for money, like we were some bottomless bank account. I glanced at Jake, who had been silent this whole time. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his face a mask of anger. He wasn't going to say it, so I did. "We're not paying a cent," I said, "until Lucas apologizes." To my face. "And not through you," I added firmly. "Lucas needs to come here himself and look me in the eye when he says it. Until that happens, don't come asking us for anything." Karen and Linda looked completely blindsided, as though I just said something outrageous. Karen's eyes went wide with disbelief. But Lucas is just a kid, she argued, her voice shaking, already teetering on the edge of tears. He doesn't deserve to miss out on college because of his brother's mistake. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone even. It wasn't just Max. Lucas sat there, laughing right along with him. He didn't say a word to stop it. He didn't speak up, didn't try to diffuse it. That makes him just as complicit. Karen tried to interrupt, but I kept going. Being silent when someone's being cruel doesn't make you innocent, it just makes you a quiet accomplice. Lucas might not have thrown the insult, but he certainly didn't stop it. Jake, who had been watching quietly, finally stepped in. We've given a lot to your family, he said firmly. We've helped with school, we've supported you through rough patches, and we've never asked for anything in return. But respect? It has to go both ways, and right now, your sons haven't shown any. You could practically see the color drain from Karen's face. She looked like she had no idea how to respond. And then the tears came. Not just a few trickles. She full-on sobbed. I don't know what else to do, she cried. I'm struggling. I'm doing everything I can, and I need your help. I felt a brief twinge of sympathy, but it vanished the moment she said the next part. You're punishing the whole family over a small mistake. That's when I snapped. My voice rose before I could stop it. Calling me ugly in front of the entire family and laughing about it isn't a small mistake. It's degrading, it's cruel, and your reaction, acting like it's no big deal, is just as awful. Linda stepped in then, trying her best to play mediator. Don't let one incident tear apart the family, she said softly. We're stronger than this. We should forgive, move on. That's what family does. But I had reached my limit. I'd been swallowing disrespect for far too long. You know what? I'm done being the one who forgives and forgets. I'm done being the one who always moves on while you all continue to take advantage of us. No more. I looked each of them in the eye as I delivered my final answer. Until your sons show some genuine remorse, until they demonstrate real respect, we're not paying for anything. You'll have to figure it out yourselves. They didn't like that response one bit. Karen tried again, cycling through every emotional tactic she could think of. Apologies, guilt, even nostalgia about when the kids were younger and we were all closer. Linda leaned hard into the family unity speech, but Jake and I were unmoved. We stayed strong. Eventually, realizing they weren't going to change our minds, they left. Karen was still crying, shoulders slumped, as she walked out. Linda's face was red with frustration, her goodbye sharp and clipped. When the door finally shut, Jake and I stood in silence for a long moment. The air felt heavier, like something significant had shifted. And it had. Something in our dynamic with them had changed forever. There was no going back. But honestly, I didn't feel bad about it. Not even a little. In fact, I felt a strange sense of peace. A weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying had been lifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about keeping everyone happy. I was done sacrificing my dignity to play the role of the supportive family member. We'd given enough money, time, emotional labor, and in return, we were treated like an ATM machine with no feelings. Not anymore. That door was closed. For a while, things went quiet. Jake and I held firm. We didn't reach out, didn't respond to any indirect feelers through mutual family members. We waited. If they truly wanted to make things right, they would. And then, like clockwork, it happened. A couple of months later, we got an email, not a phone call, not a visit, just a cold, impersonal email from Max There was no subject line, no greeting, just a sentence that read, "Here's the link to Lucas's tuition payment page. Please pay it before the deadline." That was it. No hi, no how are you, no apology, no reference to the horrific birthday incident, no attempt to bridge the divide, just a transaction request, like we were a financial institution. I read the email 3 times before showing it to Jake. He took one look, scoffed, and closed his laptop. I didn't even reply. The email sat in our inbox, untouched. We left it there deliberately. If they couldn't be bothered to talk to us like human beings, we wouldn't respond like one either. We weren't going to keep funding their lives while being treated like outsiders. 2 weeks passed without any follow-up, and then Jake's phone rang. It was Linda. She got right to the point. "Did you get Mac's email?" she asked. "Lucas's tuition deadline is approaching, and Max was waiting to hear back. Maybe Jake just didn't see it." Jake didn't skip a beat. "Max who?" he replied, his voice icy. "I don't know anyone by that name." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Jake, don't be like that," Linda pleaded. "No," he cut her off. "Don't call asking for money when you couldn't even make your sons apologize for humiliating my wife. We're not funding disrespect." And that was the end of the call. Linda hesitated for a moment, maybe trying to figure out whether Jake was being sarcastic or completely serious, but after a beat of silence, she launched into her usual excuse-ridden monologue. "Oh, come on," she began, her voice laced with condescension. "You're not really holding on to a grudge over something so trivial, are you? Lucas didn't mean it. Your wife probably just misunderstood him." Jake let out a long, frustrated sigh, the kind that said he'd heard this nonsense one too many times. "Enough, Mom," he said with finality. "We're done. We're cutting them off completely. If they can't show us basic respect, they're on their own." You'd think that would have been the end of it, a clear boundary laid down, but of course it wasn't. Within minutes, Karen's name lit up Jake's phone over and over. Text after text pouring in like a flood. Every message was more desperate than the last. She was in full-blown panic mode. She claimed she would make the boys apologize, said she couldn't afford to lose our support, and begged us to reconsider. It would have been pitiful if it wasn't so transparent. The apologies weren't sincere. They weren't rooted in any actual remorse. If they'd truly been sorry, they would have come to us long before the money was on the line. The only reason they were scrambling now was because we said no. Jake didn't reply to a single message. He didn't even look up from his coffee. And I fully supported that. We were finally on the same page. We were done being used. The next day, I came home from work to find Karen and Linda standing outside our house like a pair of misplaced salespeople. No phone call, no heads up, just standing there waiting for us to come home like they expected us to roll out the red carpet. I hadn't even put the car in park before I felt my blood pressure spike. The audacity. Jake and I walked up the path side by side. I didn't say a word. I didn't trust myself not to explode right there. As I reached for the key to unlock the door, Karen jumped in with her signature performance. She launched into a speech rehearsed for maximum emotional impact, talking about how sorry they were, how they couldn't survive without our help. Her voice cracked, her eyes welled up, and sure enough, within seconds, she was. Jake didn't even flinch. He cut her off like he was slicing through rope. "We're not doing this," he said flatly. "We don't invite people into our home who disrespect us, and we're not going to keep helping people who can't even acknowledge what we've done for them." He turned to face her fully, his voice even but cold. "You should have come to us with a real apology a long time ago, not just because you need money now." Karen looked stunned, but she wasn't ready to give up. She started pleading, almost sobbing, saying she and the boys were really sorry, that they just wanted another chance. But Jake stood firm. "If they're so sorry," he asked, "then where are they? Why didn't they come to apologize in person?" That silenced her for a moment. She had no answer. And right then, Linda stepped in to try her usual save. "You know how kids are," she said, offering a patronizing smile. "They're young, they're hormonal, they say things they don't mean, but we're the adults. We should know better than to let one mistake ruin everything." That's when I snapped. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. "Calling me ugly in front of the whole family isn't just some teenage slip up," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "It's humiliating, it's cruel. And laughing about it, that's not immaturity. That's malice." I turned to Linda, "And the fact that you're standing here defending them instead of demanding accountability, that's exactly why they act the way they do. They've never faced consequences, not once, because you always cover for them." I glanced at Karen. "And you've raised them to believe they can treat people however they want and still expect handouts. That's not parenting, that's enabling." Karen's face turned red. She looked like she wanted to argue, but Jake stepped in before she could. "We've given you more chances than you deserved. This is it. Don't ask us for anything else." Karen's tears returned instantly, the waterworks dialed up to 10. She tried to play the victim, to paint herself as the heartbroken mother whose ungrateful relatives had abandoned her in her time of need. But Jake was unmoved. He opened the front door, stepped aside, and said simply, "It's time for you to go." They left after that, and let me tell you, it felt like someone had lifted 100-pound weight from my shoulders. For years, we had stretched ourselves thin, trying to be the helpful relatives, the supportive aunt and uncle, the ones who always showed up, and in return, all we got was entitled behavior and thinly veiled resentment. We had finally reached our breaking point, and it felt good. No more money, no more emotional labor, no more pretending that these one-sided relationships were healthy. They were cut off, and if that meant they had to struggle for a while, then so be it. Maybe that's exactly what they needed to finally learn something. After that final confrontation, I naively hoped that might be the end of it, that maybe finally we could have some peace. But if you've dealt with people like them, you already know that's not how it works. They didn't go quietly. It wasn't long before the guilt trips started up again, each one dressed in a different disguise. But this time, we held the line. We didn't respond to the manipulation. We didn't give in. Then, a few weeks later, we got an invitation to a family event. Jake's grandfather was turning 75, and there was going to be a big gathering. Everyone was going to be there, including Karen and her kids. When Jake showed me the invitation, we both sat there for a minute, unsure. Did we really want to go? The idea of spending an entire afternoon surrounded by people who had treated us like dirt was not appealing. Max and Lucas weren't exactly the highlight of any family event for me, but Jake's grandfather had always been kind, respectful, and welcoming, something that couldn't be said for many others in the family. We had a lot of respect for him, and we didn't want to miss celebrating such a milestone. His 75th birthday was a big deal, and we knew that if we let the drama with Karen and her boys keep us away, it would be letting them win. So with some hesitation, we decided to go. When we arrived, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The venue was buzzing with chatter and laughter, relatives catching up, kids running around, and a table set up with photos of Jake's grandfather over the years. He was beaming, clearly touched by the turnout. For a little while, it even felt like things might be okay. We hadn't seen Karen or her boys yet, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could get through the event without incident. But of course, that was too much to hope for. Standing with Jake, chatting with one of his cousins near the buffet table, when I noticed Max and Lucas standing across the room, eyes locked on me. They weren't trying to be subtle. They were staring openly, smirking as they whispered to each other. I tried to ignore it at first, reminding myself that it was a family celebration, that I was here for Grandpa, not to feed into their childish games. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced their way, they were there, leaning in, whispering, then grinning like they were in on some joke. That persistent, gut-deep feeling of unease started to settle in. I told myself I was probably being paranoid, reading too much into it. Maybe they were talking about something else entirely. But the looks on their faces, they told a different story. Then came the toast. Jake's dad was giving this beautiful, heartfelt speech about the meaning of family, about how proud he was to celebrate such a moment with his father. Everyone was listening quietly, soaking in the sentiment. I was watching Grandpa's face, soft with emotion, when I caught sight of Lucas staring at me again. He leaned toward Max, whispered something, and Max let out a quiet snort of laughter. I followed their gaze. They were looking directly at my dress. Their faces twisted into smug, juvenile grins, and I instantly felt sick. It was like being back in middle school, except worse, because these weren't awkward 13-year-olds. They were nearly grown men who should have known better. That was it. Had let too much slide already. I'd kept quiet for too long, hoping they'd change, hoping someone in that family would hold them accountable. But standing there, in front of Jake's whole extended family, while those two stared at me like I was some object to mock, I wasn't going to take it. As soon as the toast ended and the polite applause died down, I walked straight over to them. They were still laughing when they noticed me coming, but their expressions shifted fast, from smug to startled. They clearly hadn't expected me to confront them. "What's so funny?" I asked, arms crossed, voice steady. Max blinked, then forced a smile. What? "We weren't talking about you," he said, putting on his best innocent act. "Yeah, we were just messing around," Lucas added quickly, eyes darting. I stared at them, unimpressed. "Don't lie to me. You've been staring at me all day, whispering and laughing. If you've got something to say, say it to my face." They stood frozen for a moment, caught. Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came out. Max, though, he couldn't help himself. He leaned in and muttered something under his breath, clearly thinking he was being clever. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. It was a derogatory insult, one he probably thought I couldn't hear. But I did, and I snapped. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us. "What did you just say?" My voice was sharp, loud enough that people nearby started to glance over. Max's face went pale. He hadn't expected me to react like that. "It was just a joke," he muttered, eyes flicking away. "A joke?" I hissed. "You think making gross comments and mocking someone is funny? After everything Jake and I have done for your family? This is how you treat us?" Lucas, suddenly realizing how bad it looked, tried to step in. "We didn't mean anything by it," he said hurriedly. "I'm sorry, really. We were just messing around." But it was too late. I wasn't interested in weak, forced apologies. Jake must have sensed something happening because before I could say more, he was beside me. "What's going on?" he asked. I told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. Jake's jaw clenched as I spoke, and when I finished, he turned to them. "If you don't apologize right now," he said, his voice low and deadly serious, "you're both done. You'll never get anything from us again. Ever." Lucas, at least, had the decency to look ashamed. He mumbled, sorry, eyes fixed on the floor. Max, though, he just stood there, arms crossed, defiant, not a single word. Jake stared at him for a long second, then shook his head. "Let's go." We walked away, leaving them standing there. But before I did, I looked back and said, loud enough for both of them to hear, "You think you're untouchable, but you're not. One day, you're going to find out the hard way that people don't put up with this kind of crap forever." The tension in the room was thick. People had noticed the confrontation. Conversations had quieted. But I didn't care anymore. I was tired of pretending everything was okay. If that family wanted to whisper and judge, let them. The rest of the day was understandably awkward. Karen shot me nervous looks every time we crossed paths, clearly suspecting something had gone down, but not bold enough to ask. Linda avoided us completely, which honestly was a relief. Jake and I mostly kept to ourselves. We stayed until the very end, For Grandpa's sake, we weren't going to let those brats ruin his day. But once we got home, I knew things had officially shifted. There was no going back. A line had been crossed, and it wasn't ever going to be erased. After everything that happened, the confrontation at Grandpa's birthday, the countless boundary violations, the disrespect from Max and Lucas, the constant manipulation from Karen and Linda, Jake and I reached a point of absolute clarity. We were done, not just emotionally tired or temporarily upset, but completely, irrevocably finished with them. There was no part of us that believed things would ever get better, and even if they could, we no longer cared enough to find out. But of course, people like that rarely go quietly. Despite how clearly we'd drawn the line, Karen and Linda continued trying to break through, as if they thought we'd forget the humiliation, the insults, the years of being taken for granted, all because of a few half-baked apologies delivered when they realized the money was drying up. About a week after the family event, I was home on a quiet Thursday afternoon, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when my phone started going off nonstop, text after text. First from Linda, then Karen. Long, winding messages filled with sugary language about moving forward and healing. Both of them begged us to put the past behind us, to remember the good times, and to stop holding grudges. They talked about how families should stick together, how everyone makes mistakes, and how they hoped we could just start fresh. I didn't even finish reading them. The moment I saw the tone, I knew what they were. Not apologies. Not real, anyway. They were guilt trips wrapped in flowery language. There was no true accountability, no direct acknowledgement of what had actually been said or done, just vague sentiments about misunderstandings and hurt feelings, as though my pain was some passing miscommunication, not a direct result of their cruelty. I didn't respond, neither did Jake. We didn't need to. We had already made our choice, and we weren't about to let them pull us back in with empty words and manipulative tactics. But the attempts didn't stop there. Just a few days later, Karen crossed a line I hadn't expected. She showed up, uninvited and unannounced, at Jake's workplace. No call, no message, no warning. She simply walked into the lobby and told the receptionist she was there to see him. She waited there for over an hour, probably assuming her persistence would wear him down. It didn't. When Jake was told she was waiting, he didn't even hesitate. He asked the receptionist to let Karen know that he was in meetings and couldn't come out. That was all. No note, no explanation, no acknowledgement of her presence. Karen left not long after that, probably stunned that her ambush hadn't worked. But even then, I doubt she saw it for what it really was, a clear sign that the old games no longer worked on us. We thought that might finally be the end of it. We hoped the message had finally sunk in. And then, out of the blue, I received a message from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Lily, Karen's oldest daughter. Now, Lily had always been different. Even back when all three kids were living under the same roof, it was obvious she wasn't like her brothers. She was polite, hardworking, thoughtful. While Max and Lucas were busy acting like they were owed the world, Lily was out building her own life. She'd moved away after college, landed a great job, and from what we knew, was doing just fine on her own. Her message was short, no drama, no manipulation, just a heartfelt note that caught me off guard with its sincerity. She started by apologizing, not for anything she had done, but for the way her family had treated us. She said she completely understood why we had chosen to cut ties. She didn't try to sugarcoat it or play both sides. In fact, she said she had experienced her own falling out with Karen and her brothers recently, and that, honestly, she wasn't surprised things had finally exploded. Lily didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't even try to defend anyone. She simply told us she hoped we were doing okay and that she wanted us to know we weren't alone, that she was on our side. Reading her message brought tears to my eyes. After months of stress and emotional whiplash, after being painted as villains for standing up for ourselves, It meant more than I could say to hear from someone who truly understood. It reminded me that not everyone in that family was a lost cause, that you could grow up in chaos and still turn out kind, still choose decency. Lily was proof of that. Jake and I wrote back telling her how much we appreciated her message. We let her know that we were doing better, that we were finally finding peace, and that her words had helped more than she probably realized. It was a small moment, quiet, unassuming, but it brought a sense of closure that we hadn't felt in months. For the first time since the entire situation had unraveled, we felt validated, seen, heard. Lily's message was a tiny light in a dark tunnel, and it helped guide us out. From that point on, our decision was firm. We kept our boundaries. We stayed away. We didn't reach out. We didn't respond to future attempts, and there were a few more. The occasional email from Karen, a forwarded family photo from Linda, even a vague "hope you're well" message from Max that was so hollow it was laughable. But we held the line. No more money, no more emotional energy, no more enabling behavior we knew would only hurt us again. We had finally taken our lives back, and it felt good, really good. Because here's the truth no one tells you: sometimes cutting people off is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. It's not about spite, it's about self respect, about choosing peace over chaos, dignity over dysfunction. Jake and I had spent too many years bending over backward, trying to be the generous ones, the forgiving ones. But in the end, generosity means nothing without respect. And forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone endless chances to hurt you again. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, we were free. Free from the guilt, free from the drama, free from the pressure to fix relationships that were never truly reciprocal. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the best decision we ever made.